welcome to another episode of SacTown Talks. Today we have Brooke Armour. Now, she's the Executive Vice President of the California Business Roundtable and President of the Center for Jobs and the Economy. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Brooke, can you kind of give us just a short description of the Business Roundtable along with the Center for Jobs and the Economy? Kind of what do they do, their members, and so forth?
Sure. So the Business Roundtable is celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. Started in 1976 by some of the titans of industry in California at the time. And really, the Roundtable was designed to be the thought leaders in California, help support public policy. Our mission has changed through the years. We're a multi-sector business advocacy organization, but as the state has changed, so has our mission. And we very much now work on all levels of government at all, whether it's regulatory, legal, in the legislature. We're really kind of helping create and foster an environment that can allow businesses to grow jobs and grow here in California. The Center for Jobs is our newest, well, not our newest venture, but our venture from about 12 years ago. And it's our economic and data side, where we decided several years ago, our board decided we needed to really focus on the data behind the narrative. And so we track all types of economic indicators, whether it's job growth, lots on the affordability crisis going on in California, whether it's electricity prices, gas prices, and we break that down by the legislative district level. So every legislator can go onto our site and see, this is where I'm gaining jobs, this is where I'm losing jobs, this is where I need to really spend my time and attention here in the legislature.
Now, I will say that is a very helpful site that you have. I've utilized it several times just to look at electricity rates, but it's not just home electricity rates. You also do the electricity rates over impacting businesses.
Absolutely.
Gas prices. And I really love how, as you noted, how you break it down by assembly district, state senate district. And then, being around for the 5, 6, 12 years, you're able to look at things kind of historically,
Yes.
which I think is quite helpful.
Yeah, the historical context is really important, especially as we look at how some of these newer regulations are impacting some of these prices, is we can go back and say post or pre-2010, this is what electricity rates are. Then we had, cap and trade come in, and then now electricity rates are here. It allows us to really be able to draw the cause and effect and show kind of what regulations are causing costs to go up.
Well, staying kind of on this topic, what is your assessment of California's economy today, and what are we doing well, and what should Californians be concerned?
I think if I have one thing to say about the economy right now, it is that the statistic that we've been using for the last several months is that from January to July of 2026, California has grown a net 200 jobs.
Ooh.
That is not a good thing for our economy. So when we're looking at being the 5th largest economy in the world, and we are 5th, we are not 4th.
I thought we were 4th.
I know, I have bad news. We were actually never 4th. It's just we thought we were 4th. And then when all the dust settled and you looked at all the economic factors, especially kind of growth, we turned out to always have been the 5th. We are still the 5th. We may not be the 5th for long. And most importantly, when you take into account our cost of living, we fall to the 11th largest economy, which just shows how much the cost of living has a dramatic impact, not just on our daily lives, but on our economic well-being as a state as well. But it is, we've only grown 200 jobs. The other problem is the jobs we are growing are almost all government jobs and government-supported jobs. So these are not private sector jobs. We still have not recovered our private sector job loss from the pandemic.
Wow.
We are still net negative. The only job growth we've really been able to see is in the healthcare, the in-home supportive services, a lot of these jobs that are supported by Medi-Cal and taxpayer dollars. So we don't have that same economic engine that we had that's made us the 5th largest economy is not really sustaining right now. And so that's why we say we're very much at a tipping point with the economy. There are great things about California, but if we don't allow those great things about California to continue to exist and to thrive, then we have some really big problems here. And these economic indicators are only going to get worse.
So right now, with the 5th being the 5th largest economy in the world, you've got a lot of different stories. There was a story today about Paramount and the merger. But the focus of the story was on the workers and their fear of their jobs never coming back. These, high paying, middle class jobs with benefits, with, just really these jobs where people can afford to buy a home, and that fear. At the same time, we had this study or poll that was done by Mike Madrid,
Mhm.
and they looked at Latinos specifically. And when they looked at Latinos, they looked at kind of their biggest fear is being the economy. Now, how could we be the fifth largest economy in the world, and at the same time, where you have all these businesses that are looking to expand elsewhere? They're looking say, okay, I'm going to move my shop somewhere else. I'm going to expand somewhere else, and not here.
I think there is a danger to being the fifth largest economy because it allows us to hide behind that statistic and not take a deeper look at what's going on in the economy. Nobody, if you ask them at home, thinks that their own personal budget and their own personal economy supports the fifth largest economy. That's just, it doesn't work that way. And for people, in the merger issue, we still have not grown back jobs that were lost during the union strike. And there are significant issues, no matter how much tax breaks are being thrown at that industry. The entertainment industry is leaving California, and it's hemorrhaging jobs just like everywhere else. The problem is our major revenue generators in California are especially tech, but not tech beyond V1, right? So you have round one kind of investment. There are massive kind of in the venture capital world. There's tons of revenue coming in there, but they don't employ a lot of people. That's 1, 2, 4, 5 people that are making a lot of money and paying a lot of tax revenue. But when it gets to expand and actually grow, either it's a manufacturing base of a product or beyond that, they're not doing that here. The loss of the R&D tax credit, a massive hit to that. But in general, it is too expensive for electricity here. It is too expensive for people to own homes here. And it is too expensive from a regulatory standpoint. So you see a lot of companies that have a logo on a building in California, but almost all of their infrastructure is elsewhere. We've seen that with Facebook, with Tesla, with Oracle. Almost everybody, before they even announced that they were leaving California, took all of their workforce out already. And so the problem is you're left then with a very anemic job growth and with a few people sustaining tax revenue. But tax revenue is not economic health.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the other problem we fall into is as long as we have good tax revenue, we're assumed to be having good economic health. And those are not the same thing.
I think you brought up something really interesting where you've got these tech jobs that maybe 3 or 4 individuals making quite a bit of money, but yet you've got all these other businesses, like you've got the grips, you've got the people who do the lights, you've got
Yep.
all this other stuff. And then you've got all the other businesses that support that business. And,
Yep.
staying with the entertainment industry, you've got the caterers, you've got the local restaurants, you've got all these people who sell the tape,
Yeah. Yeah.
to put things together that when you don't have those jobs and all these other jobs down below end up leaving.
Absolutely. And I think that we have, as a state, rested on our laurels for a very long time because in the past 50 years, we've been really good at being cutting edge and done great things. Like we were the first to kind of create a UC and a very phenomenal state education system for higher education, and then build economies around those schools. Every other state does that now, and they do it better than we do because they got to learn from our good and our bad. But we're not unique in that anymore. And we have to acknowledge that we're not unique in that anymore. And we can't just assume because we invented something 70 years ago that it still works for today and that we're still then number one because of that. And that's, I think, one of the things that we're seeing is this idea that, well, we have the tax revenue, so we don't have to fix anything, and we're just going to kind of keep on keeping on. Meanwhile, in every, small business, middle income family is struggling in California, and a lot are leaving. And that's where everybody kind of focuses on the very high net worth individuals who are leaving, but middle income people who are leaving California is substantial. And they take tax revenue, they take jobs, and it's very concerning.
Now, are there any specifics or just areas, and I think you mentioned electricity rates, for example, that when you speak with the CEOs, that they said, hey, we would like kind of these things to be different here in California to make it easier for us to be able to expand some of those jobs or keep some of those jobs
Yeah.
and then be able to expand them?
I think the common theme between CEOs and just your average family is the idea of certainty. And we need certainty in California. The issue is we have thousands of bills that are introduced every year that don't ever take away a regulation. Even if we know that regulation is broken and not doing anything, we don't say we're going to take that away and replace it with something else. We just add another regulation on. And so what happens is for these companies, compliance costs continue because you still have to pay to comply with a regulation that's not doing anything. Now another regulation, and we're not going to give you a couple years to see if that regulation works. And so it's the idea of certainty, of just taking a step back and saying, let's look at what's working, what's not. Let's admit that we were wrong about something and go fix that before we just add something else on. Because it's the accumulation of all of that that's really becoming problematic for both CEOs and just people in California who run a small business.
I think you touched on something really important where, yes, we may be okay with one regulation, or you've got businesses saying, okay, I can deal with the regulations, but the uncertainty that comes with them. At the same time, I know your organization, the California Business Roundtable, you also look at a lot of these overlaying regulations that you have one on top of another, and sometimes they seem contradictory at times.
They are.
Or tell us about those kind of fights that you've got to endure for your members and for the general public.
One of my favorite regulations is one that requires like a technology that doesn't exist. For example, we have the at-birth rule for ships coming into our ports. And there was a requirement put out by the air districts basically saying you have to meet this regulation and this technology. Well, the technology doesn't exist, so you just have to pay the fine. So this idea that you can just use regulation to raise revenue has become very prevalent, not just in the legislature, but for all of these regulatory bodies as well, where they're just going to create a regulation. Many times it's unachievable simply because they know they can get money out of it. And it's the amount of money that's been raised through that is unbelievable. When we talk about like state revenue in California and the state budget being $200 billion, that is just the general fund. There's another fund of money that we have in California called the special fund. And special funds include the greenhouse gas reduction fund, all these other kind of little pots of money. Those have increased by 150% in the last couple of years. And that's all money that we're paying. And so when we look at the regulatory framework, I think the first thing we need to stop doing is stop saying we're going to regulate to raise revenue, because that provides a perverse incentive to just over-regulate for the sake of backfilling overspending.
Okay, you got to tell me about this ship thing. Because here's the thing is, okay, so I've got a regulation that got in place.
Yep.
The technology doesn't exist, so the ship goes to our port.
Yep.
I think it's got to connect over.
Yes.
It's got to connect over some electricity or something like that.
Yes.
And so the technology to connect it doesn't exist. The ships don't have it. The state doesn't have it.
But you're paying
yet I
a
have
fine.
to pay a fine.
Yes.
And so then that fine gets sent onto whatever goods are on that
Absolutely.
ship, which then gets
absolutely
paid by us, right? Or paid by
the end of the supply chain of regulatory costs always ends at the consumer. So we're paying all of those costs at the end. Okay. And so when you see, where California prices are always higher, it is because our gasoline prices are higher, our electricity prices are higher, our regulatory environment's more expensive. All of that gets baked into the everyday goods and services that we use. This is why, when you go to, it's why we have the highest gas prices. It's, why we have the highest electricity prices. That's not just something we pay a double tax almost on that, because we pay it once as the consumer, the direct consumer, and then we pay it again as the end user of the product that's also being taxed and affected by that.
Now, when you bring these items and these concerns over to, because you've got two different fights, right? You've got the legislature, and then you've got the regulatory agencies. And I think now we have seen where the legislature has given away some of its power on a variety of different items and given it to the regulatory. They said, well, we will pass a law where the X agency can come up with the rules by which to go and, raise fees or raise taxes and come up with the regulation for it. How do you fight on those ends? Well, because one of them is not even elected.
Well, I think we're seeing more and more, and you referenced Mike Madrid's poll from today. I think there's it's backfiring on the legislature, because the public doesn't understand that a regulatory body passed this cost increase. they're all blaming the legislature and the governor. So what, increasingly in almost every poll, when you ask voters who is responsible for these cost increases, it is the legislature, even if it was done by some sort of regulation. And now you have, I think, a new class of legislators who weren't here when all of this happened, and therefore aren't don't have pride of ownership over some of these ideas, who are now like, wait a minute, I'm getting the short end of the stick because everybody's mad at me about something I didn't do and have arguably no control over. So you're seeing some really great legislation out of members like Assemblywoman Farias and others who are trying to say, hey, actually look at the intended and unintended costs of some of these regulations, because what you're doing isn't working and we're the ones that are taking the blame. It's never going to be this obscure multi-letter agency that gets it's your elected official. When you're going to some Chamber of Commerce event, you're going to hear it. And I think that consciousness and that kind of connecting those dots that voters are making, I'm hopeful will make a difference. And we're in the process of electing a lot of new legislators. We're in the process of electing a new governor. And I think that it really is kind of a blank slate moving forward, where there is a great opportunity to be able to address some of these things and really hopefully start to kind of right that ship.
Well, and that's kind of one of the areas that Business Roundtable kind of also works into, which is the election phase. And so kind of going into that, Brooke, we got a ton of ballot measures on
We do.
and not just in the state, but locally. You add all those things together. Are there some measures that are a little bit more significant, or something area that you're focused on that are kind of have kind of crept up?
Yeah, I think, there are 14 measures on the ballot, right? That's a lot. And it is both a blessing and a curse that we have direct democracy in California,
Right.
because it is really up to voters to make what are some really important decisions for the future of California. I think the most impactful one and the most concerning one is Prop 40. That's the so-called billionaires tax. That one has, I think, the most probability of having a detrimental impact to the state if passed, because it is written, it has what we are calling pre-planned loopholes, where the people who wrote it, very smart people, professors in California, but these pre-planned loopholes allow the legislature to change who is taxed and how, so that it doesn't just affect billionaires. The legislature gets to change and decide what that tax threshold is. They can move it down. They can also decide what type of property is taxed. So it's a workaround on Prop 13. The people who wrote this weren't dumb. If it's passed, it is the largest expansion of the legislature's ability to raise taxes in California in decades, and should be concerning for everybody, especially right now when we have an overspending problem in California. We're still doing great as a state when it comes to revenue. We bring in about 5% more every year, but we spend 9% more. And that's unsustainable. And we're seeing it now as you have these out-year deficits. And now all of a sudden, here is this quote unquote billionaires tax. Oh, it's not going to affect you. It's just going to affect these billionaires, and they make plenty of money. But they wrote it so that it can affect everybody, and it will. And it gives a legislature the ability to do that. And you have no recourse as a voter after that. And so it's incredibly dangerous. It's incredibly problematic. And for anybody who's worried about the cost of living in California, it is the number one priority of what needs to be defeated at the ballot.
So let's break that one into two, because I know that there's been a lot of discussions about, okay, this is just going to tax billionaires. And I think what you're saying is you got to look beyond the ballot title.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And so when you look at let's just take the billionaires and so forth, and it's 5% of their wealth. It isn't 5% of what's in their bank account. It is 5% of what. So like a home, for example, if they own a $5 million home, then it's 5% of that $5 million home. If they have artwork that they own, it's 5% of that artwork. Or am I getting this wrong?
No, you're right. If you own the San Diego Padres, it's 5% of the Padres.
Okay.
I am saying that as a San Diego resident
or my
former,
Dodgers.
Right? Yes. Well, your Dodgers are not. The owners of the Dodgers are not a California resident.
Okay.
Although the new owners of the Lakers possibly may be. So there are, it is both what's called tangible and intangible wealth. And that's really what it comes down to, is you have, how do you even define who is a billionaire when one day the stock market might be doing really well, and you are, and the next day it craters and you're not. When you have your wealth tied up in these other assets and that changes over time, how you even are making these definitions and these determinations is really problematic.
Yeah.
But it is the first time where the legislature really gets its hands on intangible wealth, savings accounts, 401ks, all of that comes under the responsibility and purview and
Did
taxation.
you say even the
Yeah.
401k?
Yeah, it's wealth. It's wealth, and it is a wealth tax, not a billionaire tax. So anything that you're saving for your retirement, any type of your home, which is how it gets around Prop 13, all of this becomes under the responsibility of the legislature to determine how and when it's taxed.
Okay, so right now the ballot measure, the way the title is read or written, along with kind of the description,
Mhm.
it's got billionaires, but you say that there's a loophole in
Yep.
there. The unintended consequences oftentimes with legislation, but even with the ballot measure, there's a loophole in there that could get people like you and me.
Yeah. So the way the measure is written is it's a constitutional amendment that allows the taxation of all these different properties and all these different things, because Prop 13 is a constitutional amendment. So the only way to amend the Constitution is to is to do a constitutional amendment.
Right.
That has to be voted on by voters. But all of the details of how and when the tax applies to is in Revenue and Taxation Code. And Revenue and Taxation Code can be changed by the legislature. And so they deliberately said, okay, we're going to circumvent all current taxpayer protections by making a constitutional amendment, and then put everything else and all those details into the Revenue and Taxation Code, where now the legislature has the responsibility and
So
the
they
ability
can have
to
the
change
power
it.
to change it and then say, okay,
Absolutely.
we're not just going after billion. And just so I can
Yeah.
understand this, and for everyone listening, so it's not just going after billionaires, but they can change it and then go
Mhm.
after other people.
Yes.
And they can say, okay, I'm going after someone worth $5 million, $1 million,
Yes.
$200,000 and lower.
Well, and we all know that the number one priority of many of the public employee unions has been Prop 13. This allows the legislature to circumvent Prop 13 because they can tax real property by changing and amending the Revenue and Taxation Code and not have to touch the Constitution that way. So it allows them to go around Prop 13 and empowers them to be able to basically either create a split roll or increase property taxes that way.
And if it does that, then, for example, like my home,
Mhm.
and if it goes down to individuals like myself, then it's 5% of my home, 5% of my 401k, my savings account, and that which
Yeah.
I look to leave to my girls.
Yes. So the
Okay.
idea of, what I think we were talking before we started about
Yeah.
we're parents, our goal is to be able to create and grow generational wealth for
Yeah.
our next generation and for our kids. Really, this is an attack on that generational wealth because it allows all of that wealth to be taxed by the legislature.
Now, what is going to happen with the entrepreneurs? What's going to happen with those individuals who are looking to maybe start up a business or say, hey, I need to go get some venture capital money because I've got an idea
Yeah.
and I want to create it. I mean, obviously, we've got some amazing weather. We've got amazing people here
Yeah.
in California. But what are you hearing from these entrepreneurs, these other individuals who are the VCs of the world?
Yeah. Well, we've already lost almost $1 trillion of capital since this measure was proposed. And what we're hearing from different kind of, of the kind of creator class that this is allegedly going after,
Yeah.
the problem is there's nothing keeping them in California, right? They are highly mobile people. Most of them have multiple houses. They don't really even have to go buy another house. They just have to establish residencies somewhere else. But their tax revenue makes up, more than half of the state budget.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at that, those are social services, those are our schools, those are our roads, those are our healthcare, all of that is what they fund. And if they go and they take that tax revenue with them, who's left to pay the bill? Everybody else, because we're going to need that revenue from somewhere. And so if they leave, the hole that's left in the budget is phenomenal. And it's going to have to be paid out of somewhere and somehow, which again is why the writers of the measure are allowing the legislature to change the tax, because they know the implications of this, and they know we may end up losing revenue. And if so, we're going to have to find it somewhere else. Let's give the legislature the ability to figure it out.
Now, are there other measures that you guys are working on?
Certainly. I mean, there are 14 measures on the ballot, right? This is 100%. I mean, to take the words of former Jerry Brown, an existential crisis for everybody. But there are a lot of things on the ballot, both good and bad, that we're looking at. And one of the most important ones that we're co-sponsoring is Prop 43, which is the Local Taxpayer Protection Act. It is really the only measure on the ballot that is focused on reining in the cost of living as opposed to expanding taxes. This, several years ago, the courts undid a voter enacted taxpayer protections that said that all local special taxes, so taxes that are dedicated for a single purpose, need to be passed by a 2/3 vote. Arbitrarily, the court said, no, that can be done by majority if it's done by voters and not through a legislative body. Very complicated. But ultimately, what it did is it opened up the floodgates for a whole bunch of really bad new taxes.
And so you get all these local taxes that get
all these
added
local
on?
taxes that get added on. And so what we've been working on since is, this wasn't something that the voters decided. This was something the courts arbitrarily did. So we're going back to the voters and saying, hey, do you want this back, or do you want to agree with what the court said? And really, it's about saying a 2/3 vote for all special taxes, which allows there to be more compromise, more work done with all affected parties to come up with a good tax and not just an arbitrary tax. For example, San Bernardino County has a transportation tax this year that they're putting on the ballot. It's a special tax for transportation. They are abiding by the initial will of the people and are asking voters at a 2/3 threshold to support that. The business community is engaged. The Inland Empire Economic Partnership, great partners down there, are helping support it. We, as the California Business Roundtable, are supporting it, and several are because they did it right. They did it where there's strong transparency, strong accountability, and really the guarantees that the money is going to go to where it needs to go. That type of collaboration is only what happens when you have a 2/3 vote threshold where everybody agrees and works together on a project. And so that's what we're encouraging. That's what we're supporting in Proposition 43. It is really the only cost of living measure on the ballot that helps kind of rein in some of these high taxes and kind of over and over in taxes on pretty much everything at this point.
Well, and speaking about your, the organizations you work with or work for, what role does the California Business Roundtable play in educating Californians about these measures in 2026?
We have always played a very significant role and will continue to do so. It's intimidating as a voter to look at the voter guide and see, sometimes it's like this thick and there's a lot of information in there. And there are some really good and some really bad measures on the ballot. So we spend a significant amount of time talking to voters, educating them about, what's on the ballot, whether that's through earned media where we're, doing interviews, things like this, or whether we're kind of doing paid media as well, where we're kind of doing ads, because ultimately, the cost of living is something, it's not just a business issue. It's not just a residential issue. It's for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And we want to be able to live and work here just like everybody else does. California is a beautiful state, and there are so many things that we have going for us. And we're going to fight like hell to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to be here. It shouldn't be a privilege to be a California resident. And that's really something that we're seeing more and more as costs drive people out, cost drives businesses out, that there's just the privileged few or those that can't afford to leave that are left here. And we're trying to really right that ship. And a lot of that comes through ballot propositions.
Now, we've got to get a new governor.
Yes.
Coming in, in January, right? With the election, you got the election in November coming in January. You're going to get probably 1/3 new legislature coming in also. When you look forward in 5 years from now, are there certain things that would let you know that we're starting to go down the right road, or that it's starting to be a little bit easier for creating jobs and that economic opportunity? Are there certain indicators for you?
Absolutely. Number one, new housing starts. And it can't just be affordable infill housing. We need all housing for all people. That is the number one thing that we have to do in California. It is the biggest cost of everything driver. And it is the probably going to be the most important kind of factor moving forward. That's why Prop 45, the California Environmental Quality Act, the CEQA measure on the ballot is so important, and we're supporting it, and so many are, is because it really is about reforming some of the regulations in California and allowing us to build more, build faster, but build responsibly. We're not trying to say no regulations ever and ever. We're trying to say we have frameworks in California. We can't let the environment be a weapon against housing, against prosperity in California. They can coexist, and that's really what the CEQA measure Prop 45 is about.
And talking about the secret thing, it's really interesting because you've got this environmental review, right? That is allowed. But if I'm building a stadium, for some reason, that's exempt.
Yeah.
Or they get all these exemptions, but yet when you're looking to build housing for families, it's not exempt.
Yeah, we through the Center for Jobs did a report several years ago in partnership with some really great environmental lawyers looking at what CEQA who's the victim of CEQA lawsuits, what type of development, and it's almost always affordable housing. So what CEQA has really become is a way for NIMBYs to say, I don't want these undesirable housing elements in my community, and I'm going to use CEQA as a way to stop that from happening. And so if you want to build affordable housing, you have to fix CEQA. And the incremental things that have happened in the legislature have not been enough, and they're never going to be enough. The legislature is never going to be the one that solves this problem. It's going to have to go to voters. But certainly housing is the number one. Being able to live and afford your house is the other. And that really comes down to electricity prices. It is hard to articulate how much electricity costs have affected and negatively impacted the economy. And you're seeing, obviously, with some of the gubernatorial candidates, they're trying to figure out solutions to this. But the average residential electric bill is twice what it was before cap and trade went into effect, right? And we pay, almost double what the national average is. Now, if you are a commercial establishment or an industrial, you're paying 150, 200% of the national average for electricity. Guess where those costs go? Back to us, right? We have policies in California that really punish working families for electricity, where it is most expensive to use electricity when working families are at home from 4 to 8 p.m. And those are things that you have to fix. You can't just build a house. You have to let them afford to live there. And electricity, especially where, I think, and this is something that is very geographic, where a lot of population density is along the coast, and a lot of legislators represent those coastal areas. It's great that you can open your window in the summertime and get a nice coastal breeze, but for most of California, that is not a thing that can happen. You have to have electricity. You have to have air conditioning. You have to be able to afford to cool your home in the summertime. It is a health issue, and the refusal to acknowledge that fact. I mean, I remember every school I went to in San Diego, none of them had air conditioning. And I remember a couple years ago, there was a heat wave in San Diego, and they had to shut down the schools for the day because it was too hot to go to school. But it's too expensive then to cool those facilities too. So there's a lot, I think that electricity and gasoline is obviously the other issues. We have to kind of take a look and understand that some of these aspirational policies have real world cost impacts, and have a more honest conversation about that, and just kind of seeing where all that lays out. But number one metric for the success of any governor for the next decade is going to be housing.
Well, in closing, Brooke, I want to ask you this question. If you could tell every Californian voter one thing before this November election, what would you like to have them understand of the connection between public policy, business, jobs, and affordability?
I think the number one thing I would like to say is that don't believe the talking point that somebody else is going to pay it, whether it's business, whether it's a billionaire. It all comes back. We are the end of that line, and everybody ends up paying more, whether it is in higher, that's we all pay. And so when you're looking at the values that you want to support on the ballot this November, it is what's worked, what is the legislature fixed with the money it's had right now, and do they deserve more money for that? And I think more and more we're seeing the answer to that is no. But read the fine print and do your homework. It is a heavy burden to be a voter in California when you have some major issues like this on the ballot. But just remember, everybody pays. This is not something, it's not a business tax. It is not a billionaire tax. It is always an everyone tax.
I think it's a great way to kind of leave this segment. Thank you so much, Brooke,
Thank
for
you.
your time.
Thank you.